In a world not so different from ours, a great conflict was brewing, though no one had anticipated it. Earth, once the home to only humans, was now a battleground between two powerful forces, humans and aliens from another realm. For years, they had coexisted in silence, but that peace was soon shattered. Among the aliens was a race unlike any other, beings with the grace and agility of animals. They were known as the Feline, tall feline creatures with fur as radiant as fire. Their eyes sparkled with intelligence, and their sleek bodies moved with an elegance that was both beautiful and deadly. One of them, a young and fearless Feline named Arya, was destined to become the symbol of change. Arya wasn't like the others in her species. She was daring, ambitious, and curious about the human world. But what truly set her apart was her unshakable belief in the possibility of peace between humans and aliens. Many in her world believed that war was inevitable, but Arya thought differently. She believed in reversing the roles, in showing humans what it felt like to be controlled, to be led, and perhaps, to be humbled. On a regular day, Arya found herself walking through the crowded streets of her city, a city unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Buildings towered above her, bathed in the glow of neon lights, and vehicles zipped through the air. It was a world of technology and mysticism, where the old and new collided in harmony. Arya had been sent to Earth on a mission to observe and understand the humans. But she hadn't expected it to unfold like this. The war had begun. Unexpectedly, sparked by a misunderstanding. The first human military strike had been aimed at one of the Feline outposts, a peaceful settlement. It was meant to be a warning, but to the Feline, it felt like an attack, a challenge to their existence. They retaliated, and soon both sides found themselves in a full-fledged conflict. Arya knew that the war could end badly for both sides, and she couldn't stand by and let it happen. But what could one Feline do against such a powerful force? The answer came to her in a moment of clarity. She could reverse the roles. If humans could not understand the consequences of war, perhaps they needed to experience what it was like to be ruled, to be led by a force stronger than them. She wasn't alone in her thoughts. Others shared her vision. But they weren't just talking about diplomacy or peaceful negotiations. They were going to show the humans what it meant to be at the mercy of a superior force, a force they had once tried to dominate. As the war raged on, Arya knew that the time was coming. Soon, the humans would realize they were no longer in control. She had seen the destruction on both sides, and it sickened her. But there was no turning back now. She had to take a bold step, one that would change everything. In a darkened alley of the human city, Arya met a man named Jack, a soldier in the human army. He had seen the horrors of the war firsthand. He wasn't a bad man, but like many others, he had been swept up in the chaos. Arya knew that Jack could be her bridge to the human world. With him by her side, she could show the humans the price of their aggression, the true cost of war. But she had to convince him first. "I don't want to fight anymore," Jack said, his voice tired and full of regret. Her golden eyes glowing with determination, stepped closer. "Then help me end it. Help me reverse the roles." Jack looked at her, unsure of what to think. A part of him wanted to believe her, but the war had taken so much from him. The destruction, the loss, it had all become too much. He was torn between what he had been taught and the strange alien before him who seemed to hold the key to a new future. "I don't know how," Jack muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "How can we undo everything that's been done?" Arya smiled softly. "We start by showing the humans what it feels like to be led, to follow, instead of always being in charge. We show them what it feels like to be human in their own world." The world around them was shifting, and Arya knew the path ahead would not be easy. But she had a plan that could change the course of history. Little did they know, their Meeting in the dark alley would mark the beginning of an extraordinary journey. The unexpected war had begun, but Arya and Jack were about to reverse the roles. The night was cold, and the neon lights of the city seemed to flicker in and out of existence as the distant sounds of conflict echoed through the streets. Arya and Jack stood side by side, the weight of their decision hanging heavy between them. Neither of them had expected to be here, to be working together, but fate had a way of bringing unlikely allies together when the stakes were high. The air was thick with tension as Arya led Jack through the winding alleyways of the city, away from prying eyes. The Feline, despite their advanced technology, had managed to stay hidden for the most part. Their sleek, feline forms could blend seamlessly into their surroundings, but the war had begun to expose them, and they couldn't afford to stay in the shadows much longer. Arya knew that every step they took brought them closer to an inevitable confrontation, but she had no choice. She had to show Jack and through him, the humans, that there was a different path forward. "Where are we going?" Jack asked, his voice filled with both curiosity and caution. His instincts as a soldier told him that following a strange alien woman into the unknown was a risky move. But something about her presence made him want to trust her, even though he didn't fully understand why. "We're going to a place where we can talk," Arya said quietly, "where no one can find us." "This isn't going to be easy, Jack, but it's the only way." Jack nodded slowly, his mind racing. The war had taken everything from him, his family, his friends, and his faith in humanity. He had been a soldier, trained to follow orders without question. But as the battle lines blurred, he started to wonder if all the bloodshed was truly worth it. Was there another way? Could peace be possible even now? They stopped in front of an old building, one that seemed abandoned, its windows shattered, and its walls covered in layers of graffiti. Arya motioned for Jack to follow her inside. The room was dimly lit, filled with strange symbols and markings that seemed foreign to him. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something else. Something ancient. Inside, a small group of Feline were waiting. They weren't the usual soldiers Arya had fought alongside. These were scholars, thinkers, strategists. They had been waiting for Arya to bring Jack, and now that the moment had arrived, they began to speak. "Is this the human?" one of them asked, eyeing Jack with suspicion. Arya nodded. "This is Jack," she said. "He's one of them, but he's also one of us now. We're going to need his help if we have any hope of ending this war." The Feline around them exchanged wary glances. It wasn't often that a human was allowed into their inner circle, and the idea of trusting one was risky. But Arya was determined. She had seen the potential in Jack, and she believed that he could help them bridge the gap between their two worlds. "Why should we trust him?" another Feline asked, her voice low and cautious. "Humans have brought nothing but destruction to our people." Arya's eyes burned with intensity. "Because we don't have a choice. We can't keep fighting. If we continue, both sides will be wiped out. There has to be another way, and Jack is the key." Jack shifted uncomfortably under the weight of their gaze. He had spent his life fighting for his people, but now he was standing in front of those he had been taught to see as enemies. He didn't know if he could help them, but he knew one thing for sure: the war had to end. "You want me to help you stop the war?" Jack asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "What can I possibly do? I'm just a soldier. I don't know anything about peace." Arya stepped closer to him, her golden eyes meeting his. "That's exactly why you're here. You're not like the others. You don't want to fight. You've seen the horrors of this war, just like I have. You understand that it's not just about winning or losing. It's about survival. And if we're going to survive, we need to change everything." For a long moment, Jack stood in silence, weighing her words. He had spent his life trained for war, but now he was being asked to believe in something completely different. A part of him wanted to reject it, to go back to. The comfort of knowing what he had to do. But another part of him, a part that had grown tired of the endless violence, wanted to believe in Arya's vision. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll help you. But I need to know how we're going to stop this. I need a plan." Arya smiled, relieved. "We have a plan, but it's going to take time. We need to show the humans what it's like to be in a position of powerlessness, to reverse the roles. We'll start by taking control of the narrative. If we can make the humans realize what they've done, what they've become, then we might just be able to change the course of this war." As Arya spoke, Jack felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this strange alliance could work. But he knew the road ahead would be dangerous. The war was far from over, and the Feline were not the only ones with a plan. Out there, in the city, the human military was preparing for its next strike. And Jack knew that once the war escalated further, there would be no turning back. But he also knew that he had made a choice. And with Arya by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. The weight of the decision lay heavy on both Arya and Jack, but neither of them had time to dwell on their doubts. The world around them was shifting, and they had to move quickly. Their alliance, though fragile, was their only hope to end the war. If they failed, not only would they be responsible for the destruction of their people, but they would also doom Earth to a future of endless conflict. The next morning, Arya and Jack set their plan in motion. They had gathered a small group of Feline to assist them, and together, they formed a tight-knit unit. Arya had already briefed them on the basics of their mission. The first step was to infiltrate the human government and media. They needed to control the narrative, to ensure the humans saw their own actions for what they truly were. It wouldn't be easy, but Arya believed it was the only way to stop the war from escalating. But as they moved through the streets of the human city, Arya couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The city felt different, tense, as though unseen eyes were watching them. It wasn't just the usual paranoia that came with being an alien in a foreign land. This was something else, something deeper. "Stay close," Arya whispered to Jack as they moved through a crowded marketplace. "I don't trust this place. Not anymore." Jack, sensing her unease, nodded silently. The streets were crowded with people, but there was an unnatural hush in the air. People moved about their business, but there was an underlying tension, as if they knew something was about to change, something they couldn't control. They arrived at their first destination, an underground facility, a hidden hub of military operations and media control. Arya had used her connections to find it, and she was certain it was their best chance to get their message across. Inside, they were met by a small group of humans who had secretly turned against their own government, fed up with the violence and manipulation. They were led by a woman named Elena, a former government official who had once believed in the righteousness of the war, but had seen the truth once it was too late. "Welcome," Elena said, her voice low but firm. "We've been expecting you." Arya and Jack exchanged a glance. Elena's presence was unexpected, but it was clear she understood the stakes. They had found an ally in the most unlikely of places. "I'm glad you're here," Arya said, her voice steady despite the urgency of their situation. "We need your help. The humans are blinded by their own pride. We have to show them what they're doing, what they've become." Elena nodded. "We've been monitoring the government's actions for months now. The media has been spreading lies, manipulating the public. If we want to change anything, we have to expose the truth. We'll need evidence, something they can't deny." Jack frowned. "But how do we get it? The government controls everything. They'll stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden." "Not if we control the flow of information," Elena replied, her eyes sharp. "We have one advantage. The truth is always more powerful than a lie. If we can get a message out, something that shows the real consequences of this war, the public might start questioning their leaders. They'll begin to see the truth, and once they do, everything changes. Arya's eyes gleamed with determination. Then let's get to work. As they began to plan, Arya couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The tension in the city was palpable, and she knew that the longer they stayed in one place, the more likely it was that they would be discovered. But the stakes were too high, and there was no turning back now. Their mission was clear: infiltrate the media, expose the truth about the war, and force the humans to confront the reality of what they were doing. But Arya knew that their success depended not only on the information they gathered, but on how the humans responded. If they could turn the tide of public opinion, they could change the course of the war. But if they failed, the conflict would spiral out of control, and the Feline and humans would be locked in an endless cycle of violence. As the team worked tirelessly, hacking into government databases and broadcasting secret messages to the public, Arya felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had come to Earth to stop the war, to show the humans that there was another way. But now she was beginning to understand just how dangerous her mission was. The forces she was up against were far more powerful than she had anticipated, and there were others out there, unseen and waiting, who were determined to ensure the war would continue. Jack, too, was beginning to feel the pressure. He had been a soldier, trained to fight, but this was something completely different. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for a future, a chance to undo the damage that had been done. But as they pushed forward with their plan, he began to wonder, were they truly on the right path? Was there any hope left for peace, or had they already gone too far? As the day wore on, Arya's instincts told her that something was amiss. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every corner seemed to hide a threat, every shadow an enemy, but she couldn't let fear stop her. She had to stay focused. The Feline's future, and humanity's, depended on it. And so, with Jack by her side and the truth in their hands, they continued their mission. But in the back of their minds, they both knew one thing: they were playing a dangerous game, and the unseen forces against them were closing in. The days passed quickly, each one bringing more urgency to Arya and Jack's mission. The underground facility had become their base of operations. The Feline and humans worked side by side, their common goal uniting them in a way that had never seemed possible before. With each passing hour, the resistance against the war seemed to grow stronger, but so did the pressure. Arya had always known the road to peace would be difficult. But as she watched Jack, his face a mask of determination and fatigue, she couldn't help but wonder if they were doing the right thing. The fight for survival had hardened both their hearts, but now that they were so close to seeing their plan come to fruition, doubts began to creep in. What if this was all a mistake? What if they were leading their people, both humans and Feline, into even greater danger? It was in the dead of night when the first crack appeared in their alliance. The sound of footsteps echoed down the narrow hallway of the facility, sending a chill through Arya's spine. She turned to Jack, but his face was unreadable. They both knew that danger was never far behind. "Stay alert," Arya whispered, her feline senses on high alert. She had always been aware of the dangers lurking in the shadows, but tonight felt different. Tonight, something was wrong. They moved swiftly through the facility, following the faint sound of footsteps. Their small team had been working around the clock to broadcast their message, sending information to underground media channels that would be impossible for the human government to shut down. The truth was out there now, spreading like wildfire. But so was the opposition. When they reached the control room, they found Alina standing with her back to them, her fingers frozen over the keyboard. Arya's heart sank. "Elena?" Arya asked, her voice trembling with unease. "What's going on?" Elena didn't turn around. "It's too late," she said softly, her voice distant. "They've already found us. The realization hit Arya like a bolt of lightning. What do you mean, they've found us? Elena turned slowly, her eyes empty of the conviction they had once held. I never thought I'd have to do this. But I was wrong about you, Arya. I was wrong about the war. And now I've made a deal. Before Arya could react, a group of heavily armed soldiers burst into the room, their weapons aimed directly at them. Among them was a familiar face, General Carter, a high-ranking officer in the human military. Arya's heart skipped a beat. You've been a thorn in my side for too long, Feline, General Carter said coldly, his voice dripping with disdain. But I see now that you've become a bigger problem than I thought. Jack's eyes widened in shock. You were working with them? You betrayed us? Elena's face twisted with a mix of regret and fear. I had no choice. The military made me an offer I couldn't refuse. They promised me a future for humanity, a way to win the war. I didn't think you could stop them. But now ... she faltered, the weight of her words sinking in. Now it's too late. A deep sense of betrayal cut through Arya. She had trusted Elena, believed in her vision of peace. But now, everything she had fought for felt like it was crumbling to dust. The humans they had been working with, the alliance they had built, had all been a lie. Elena had chosen her own survival over the greater good. I don't have time for this, General Carter snarled, his eyes narrowing at Arya and Jack. Take them into custody. We'll deal with them later. Before anyone could react, the room was filled with blinding light, and the sound of footsteps rushed in from every direction. Arya's heart pounded in her chest as she instinctively moved to protect Jack, but it was too late. The soldiers moved too fast, and within moments, they had been surrounded. Don't resist, one of the soldiers warned, his voice harsh. We're not here to hurt you yet. Arya's mind raced. She had been caught off guard, and now, her plan was hanging by a thread. The humans had taken control of the situation, and it felt like there was no way out. But Arya wasn't one to give up easily. She had always been resourceful, always found a way to fight back. Jack, Arya whispered, her voice low, we can't give up. We have to get out of here. Jack nodded silently, his jaw set in determination. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. This was the point of no return. Either they escaped and continued their mission, or they would be taken by the military, and everything they had worked for would be destroyed. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the hallway as they were escorted through the facility. But Arya was already formulating a plan. She could feel the tension in the air. The soldiers weren't as sure of themselves as they seemed. There was an opportunity here, a gap in their security. Just as they reached a dead-end corridor, Arya struck. With lightning speed, she knocked one of the soldiers to the ground, grabbing his weapon in the process. Before anyone could react, she took out two more, her feline agility giving her the upper hand. Run! She shouted to Jack, pushing him ahead of her. The soldiers scrambled to recover, but Arya and Jack were already moving. The door to the outside world was just ahead, and they knew they had only seconds before reinforcements arrived. The sounds of chaos filled the facility as alarms blared in the distance. As they burst out into the streets, Arya's heart raced. They were no longer in control of their mission. But they still had a chance. They had escaped, and they had the truth. Now they had to make sure the world knew the truth, no matter the cost. But as they fled through the darkened streets, Arya couldn't shake the feeling that their betrayal was only the beginning. There were more enemies in the shadows, more forces at work, and their fight for peace was far from over. The night air was cold against Arya's skin as she and Jack ran through the empty streets, the distant hum of sirens warning them that time was running out. The betrayal they had suffered weighed heavily on them, but they couldn't afford to dwell on it now. The military was in full pursuit, and their only chance was to stay one step ahead. Arya's mind was spinning. She had trusted Elena, she had believed that together they could turn the tide of the war, but now that hope had been shattered. Elena's betrayal wasn't just a personal loss for Arya, it was a blow to everything they had worked for. The humans they had trusted had turned on them, and now they were hunted criminals, fugitives in a city that was once their ally. Jack's breath came in ragged gasps as they darted through alleyways, ducking behind crates and vehicles to avoid detection. He had seen the look of betrayal on Elena's face, the fear and regret in her eyes, but it didn't matter now. Their mission was the only thing that mattered, and they couldn't let her actions derail everything they had fought. 4. We need to find somewhere safe, Jack said, his voice strained from the effort. They'll be coming after us with everything they've got. Arya nodded, scanning the dark streets for any sign of a safe haven. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but her instincts told her they still had a chance. The human military was powerful, yes, but they weren't invincible. The truth they had been spreading was powerful, and now it was up to them to make sure it reached the people who needed to hear it most. They reached a quiet residential area, the houses modest and close together, offering a brief respite from the chaos. Arya's keen senses detected no immediate threats, and she motioned for Jack to follow her into the shadows of an old, abandoned building. It was small, hidden away from the main roads, and for the moment, it would have to do as they collapsed against the wall inside. Trying to catch their breath, Jack turned to Arya, his eyes filled with determination. What now? We can't just keep running forever. We need to figure out how to strike back. Arya's golden eyes glinted with resolve. We're not just running, Jack. We're still in this. We've got the truth, and the truth will always find its way. We need to find a way to get that message out to the world, to make the people understand what's really going on. If they see the truth, if they hear what's really happening, they won't stand for it anymore. Jack nodded slowly, understanding what she meant. It wasn't just about stopping the war, it was about changing the narrative, about showing the people that they had been misled, that they were being manipulated by their own government. If the public turned against the military, if they demanded accountability, the war would crumble under its own weight. But they couldn't do it alone. We need help, Jack said, his voice quiet but firm. There are people out there, people who don't believe in this war. If we can reach them, if we can unite them, we can fight back. Arya's eyes sparkled with renewed hope. Exactly. We need to reach the resistance. We need to get in touch with the leaders who are still fighting for peace. If we can join forces, we can show the world that this war isn't just about humans versus Feline. It's about the people fighting to end the violence. The next few hours were a blur of planning. Arya and Jack worked in silence, gathering information from the hacked files they had managed to extract from the government database before the facility was overrun. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them a foothold. The first step was to find the resistance leaders, those who had been operating in the shadows, away from the prying eyes of the military. They had to get in contact with them, convince them that they were still fighting for the same cause, for peace, for an end to the war that had taken so much. As the night stretched on, they formulated a plan to reach the resistance. They would use underground communication channels, encrypted messages that couldn't be traced by the military. It would take time, but Arya was confident. With Jack by her side, she knew they could do it. They didn't sleep. Instead, they spent the hours working tirelessly, sending out messages, gathering allies, preparing for the next phase of their plan. But as the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the building's walls, a thought lingered in Arya's mind. They were running out of time. The military was closing in, and soon, they wouldn't have the luxury of moving freely. Just as they were finalizing their plans, a message came through the encrypted channel. It was from a name Arya hadn't expected to hear again, Elena. "I'm sorry, Arya," the message began. "I was wrong. The truth is out there now, and I can't stay silent anymore. I've sent you the location of the Resistance's main base. Get there quickly. We can still stop this." Arya stared at the message in disbelief. Elena had turned on the military. She had betrayed them, but now she was offering a chance at redemption. It wasn't just the truth she had given them. She had given them a lifeline. "We have to move," Arya said, her voice steady. "This is it, Jack. We have a chance to end this war. Once we reach the Resistance, we'll have the power to change everything." Jack nodded, his expression grim, but resolute. "Then let's do it. Let's finish this." With one final look around the abandoned building, Arya and Jack set out, the weight of their mission on their shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain, but they knew one thing for sure. They were no longer running. They were going to fight, and they were going to win. The turning point had arrived, asterisk. The road to this moment had been long and treacherous. Arya and Jack had fought for survival, endured betrayal, and struggled with doubt. But now, with the truth in their hands and the hope of peace before them, they stood at the precipice of a new future. This was the moment that would define not only their lives, but the fate of both humanity and the Feline as they approached the Resistance's base. Nestled in the heart of a dense forest far from the city's eyes, Arya felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle they had been fighting was not just against the human military or the Feline war factions. It was against the idea that peace could never be achieved. Today, they would prove that it could. The base was hidden, well secured, and camouflaged, in a way that would be impossible for the military to detect. But Arya and Jack knew that time was running out. The military had been hunting them relentlessly, and every minute spent in hiding only brought them closer to a confrontation they couldn't avoid. "Ready?" Jack asked, his voice steady but his eyes betraying the weight of the moment. Arya nodded, her golden eyes gleaming with resolve. "We don't have a choice now. It's all or nothing." They entered the base with Elena's coordinates guiding them through winding tunnels. The Resistance members, mostly humans and a few sympathetic Feline, were gathered around a series of screens, their faces filled with worry. But when they saw Arya and Jack, a spark of hope ignited in their eyes. This was it, their last chance to change the outcome of the war. Elena stood by a table, her face pale but determined. She approached them as they entered, her eyes apologetic yet filled with gratitude. "I know I can't undo what I did," she said softly, "but I'm here now. I believe in what you're doing. We can end this." Arya looked at her, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. "Thank you," she said quietly, acknowledging Elena's willingness to help, despite her past betrayal. "We're not just fighting to stop the war, we're fighting to change the future. We can't afford to fail." The Resistance members quickly gathered around, listening intently as Arya explained the next phase of their plan. They had to infiltrate the Central Military Command and broadcast the truth to every corner of the world. The Feline had suffered, but so had the humans. Both sides had been manipulated by leaders who cared nothing for peace. Now they had the chance to show humanity the cost of their actions, to expose the lies and force them to confront the reality of their war. The plan was dangerous. They would need to slip past military forces guarding the Central Command, breach the communication systems, and broadcast a message that would change everything. Arya knew that this was their one shot. Once they took this step, there would be no turning back. As they prepped for the mission, the air was thick with anticipation. The members of the Resistance, once skeptical, were now fully on board. They had seen the truth, and they knew this was their final opportunity to stop the bloodshed. Together, they would fight not just for survival, but for a future where both humans and Feline could live in peace. Arya, Jack, and the Resistance team set off under the cover of night, moving quickly and quietly through the dense forest. The central command was located just beyond the city, guarded heavily by military forces. It was a fortress, but Arya's agility and Jack's military training gave them an edge. They managed to slip past the first line of defenses, evading detection with careful precision. When they reached the communication hub, the final obstacle stood before them, a heavily fortified control room. The military had placed its best soldiers here, but Arya and Jack were ready. Using the stealth and tactics they had honed over the past weeks, they infiltrated the base, eliminating the guards quietly and swiftly. Inside the control room, Arya's heart raced. The computers were already set up to broadcast their message, but there was no time to waste. They needed to act fast before reinforcements arrived. "Do it now," Jack urged, his eyes scanning the hallway outside. Arya moved to the console, her fingers flying across the keys. With a deep breath, she initiated the broadcast, sending the truth to every screen, every speaker, every news outlet across the planet. The images that flashed on the screens were of destruction cities reduced to rubble, families torn apart, soldiers lost to pointless violence. The faces of Feline and humans alike, all victims of a war that had been waged on false pretenses. Voice echoed over the broadcast. "This is not the future we want. This is not the world we should leave for our children. We've been manipulated, misled into thinking that violence was the only answer. But it is not. We are all connected, and together, we can build a world where peace reigns. The time for war is over. The time for healing begins now." The broadcast was just the beginning. As the message spread, it ignited a firestorm of public outcry. Across the globe, people began to question their leaders. Protests erupted, demanding an end to the conflict. The truth had set them free, and it couldn't be denied. But as the broadcast ended, Arya and Jack knew they hadn't won yet. The military would come for them, and the fight wasn't over. But the wheels had already been set in motion. The people of Earth and Feline were no longer blind to the truth, and they would not stand for more bloodshed. In the days that followed, the world was transformed. The leaders of both the human and Feline forces were forced to answer for their actions. The war began to unravel, and a ceasefire was declared. Negotiations began, and peace talks were held, bringing an end to the violence. Arya and Jack stood together in the heart of the city, watching the sunrise over a new world. It wasn't perfect, and the scars of war would take time to heal, but it was a beginning. They had reversed the roles. They had shown the humans what it was like to be ruled by others. And in doing so, they had earned the peace they all deserved. "We did it," Jack said quietly, his voice filled with awe. Arya smiled, her eyes reflecting the dawn. "No, Jack, we all did it. The war was over. The world was changing." And for the first time in a long time, Arya believed in the possibility of peace. Asterisk.